Hi, everybody. This is David P. France, and I'm coming to you from Basel, Switzerland. Before we get started with this interview, I'd like everyone who is out there, who is watching, to like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we have BitChute as well, and to share the videos with your friends and family. Let them know, let the people know what we are up to. This is David P. France TV, and we are a platform for creators, and creative people. Creators and creative people, right? Artists, writers, thought leaders, inventors, small business owners, entrepreneurs. And today I'm speaking to someone who I haven't seen in a long time, a very good friend of mine, Karen Chambers, coming all the way from South Orange, New Jersey. Karen, how's it going?
It's going well. I can't complain.
You can't complain.
Yeah.
Karen and I have known each other since the
Let's 80s? Do that math, David. Since like 82, 81, somewhere thereabouts.
Yeah. And currently Karen is an executive vice president for Iman Cosmetics. And before we get into that, I mean, we talked about this before we started the conversation. How come I recall that you had worked, I thought you had worked for Iman for longer than you and I, longer than what you have told me. I mean, maybe, was there any sort of freelance work that you were doing? I think early on.
You have a good memory. Wow.
We were in high school. I think I remember that, right?
Yeah, not way back in high school, not that far back, but I did do some freelance copywriting for Iman before I worked for the brand full time. So that was like, I don't know, somewhere like in my 20s or somewhere thereabouts. Yeah. But wow, I can't believe you remember that.
Karen, of course, we already talked about this. This is why I have the channel, right? Because I mean, I'm talking to people that are like, you know, that are able to, that are people who are creative, right? People who are creative. And you and I, you know, well, let's just start. Let me tell you, we met each other in 1982-ish. And I think this was like high school. Was this high school?
Yeah.
It was high school, right? And just so you guys know, Karen is like, Karen has so many different talents. And I think I was telling her before we started the interview that I was watching her, you know, she was able to do hair and she do makeup. And she, you know, of course, she and I would always talk about these artists and musicians and Prince, Sheila E., celebrity, you know, like you were one of the people that would really, you know, go toe to toe with me with regard to pop culture or with regard to, you know, what was out there in what is now, you know, sort of the public domain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, tell people what you're up to. Tell them a little bit about yourself, and then we can go from there.
Sure.
I mean, I'm talking more than you in this moment.
Sure. No, that's fine. That's fine. Well, right now, like you mentioned, I've been EVP at Iman probably for the past 3 years. And before that, I was director of product development. So I've worked with the brand for a number of years in different capacities. And then prior to that, I worked, you know, in multicultural, we're calling it now, multicultural cosmetics for a long time. I was doing the math the other day. It was like 30 years since I, you know, got my very first job in the industry. And that has always been really important for me because, you know, just growing up, you know, like you had mentioned, I always had an interest in a lot of creative things. And in terms of cosmetics, that interest came about, hold on one second, David, sorry. I apologize for that, but I'm getting ready to cough and I don't want to cough on your interview. I always had an interest in cosmetics. Like it was the thing, like beauty, hair, all that was the place that I found my sense of creativity. And so after college, you know, I got that first job writing for a hair care magazine. And from there, I was just really hooked. So I always went back and forth between enjoying and pursuing writing and media and also the cosmetics industry. And for the most part, for me, it was always important to work in that whole multicultural space and really things that really were about adorning Black women and women of color, because there were so many brands out there, and a lot of them really kind of left us hanging as far as what was available for us and what worked well for our skin and what really enhanced us and our beauty. And so that was always a real passion of mine. Like, you know, you and I were talking earlier about even back to high school, you know, I was the person, I was cutting people's hair for the prom and doing people's makeup and you know, and even well before I had any kind of like licensing or training, it was just always something I enjoyed. It was fun for me. And we've had many, many conversations about that. And so it's been amazing to have a really long journey in the beauty industry, and now to have the position I have at Iman. And also, I just recently became a board member at Cosmetic Executive Women, which is a global organization for women in the beauty industry. And that's been wonderful because, you know, I'm working on a lot of multicultural initiatives there. So, pardon me, bringing that to the table has been wonderful, has really been wonderful.
And probably as much as I've been interested in the arts or dance or, you know, all of the things that you know about me, I mean, I see business as another form of communication. Okay, so that's probably why I would get so hyped up like I was dancing, you know, like the same way that I'd be on stage, because just the act of someone saying, you know, Karen, you know, I'm going to the prom and I'd like to come over and get my hair cut. Is that okay? This for me was like my ears, you know, would be ringing, right? I mean, this is I think magical, not for everybody, right? People feel like this is sort of a commonplace, but for me, what I saw was that this was almost an elevated vibration, if we would use the terminology that we will eventually start talking about later. It was an elevated vibration. It required a different mindset than what you and I and a lot of the people we went to school with, a different mindset than what people were usually employing, right? So when we were in school, and we'll get to South Orange and Columbia High School, there's a certain sort of way that people were moving through the world in that space during that time. The moment that you start making real money, right, doing anything that's your gift, this is a whole nother thing, right? So I saw what you were doing as really, really positive. And of course, I'm not surprised that you have been doing it for, you know, so long, than 30 years, and then you're on the board and this sort of thing. You recently wrote an article, and we're going to talk about this article about South Orange, New Jersey, where we grew up together and went to high school there. Like, can you tell the audience what the article was about, and if you can also disclose the newspaper or the magazine that you wrote?
Sure. It was for Tap into South Orange, Maplewood, which is a local publication here. And what happened is that initially the editor had wanted to do something, you know, featuring a number of African Americans who live in South Orange for Black History Month. And, you know, just through a course of events, that initial idea kind of wasn't quite working out the way she liked. And she and I talked about it, and I said, hey, well, you know that I write as well. I said, would you like me to do something? I said, you know, I have this experience of both growing up in South Orange, New Jersey, and then also, you know, living here again as an adult. And I said, and, you know, I'm kind of happy to write about that experience if you'd like. And she was like, sure, that'd be great. And when she got the article, she loved it. And for me, it was really fun. I think my motivation really behind it was, you know, we've gone through so much turmoil and so much tumultuous times, particularly as Black people, especially over the past year, and then prior to that, over the past 4 years. And a lot of the narratives that necessarily, you know, people have been talking about in relation to us has been about tragedy and trauma. And I think that a lot of that was necessary to begin to educate people about some of the things that they may not have already known about, the Black experience in America, and understanding things like, police brutality, et cetera. And so those conversations were important. And for me, additionally, the conversations that recognize who we are outside of or in addition to, our struggles, I felt that was important as well. So South Orange has changed a lot since you lived there. I think percentage wise, the African American population is still probably about the same as it was, but we've got a whole new crop of folks who have moved over from Brooklyn and other places. And it has remained very, politically progressive, et cetera. So, there are plenty of Black Lives Matter signs, et cetera, on folks' lawns. And we have an incredible mayor who is just very, very woke and very much an advocate for human rights. And so the feel of the town and the village is still very vibrant. But I felt as though, people who live here now, who didn't know what South Orange was like in the past, I wanted to let them know, hey, there were interesting things going on here for a very long time, and that we've had a very stable and progressive and very empowered Black community here for a very long time. And I feel a product of that community. And I just really wanted to pay kind of homage to the place that helped me develop as a person, and set the stage for, who I've become in my life. And so I'm, very grateful to my parents for having selected this town as the place that we would grow up. It gave me an opportunity, our friend group, we've done, a lot of dynamic things. We're doing dynamic things at 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, and continue to do dynamic things. And not everybody can say that about their upbringing. And I think that a lot of times the imagery that's portrayed around Black folks, to me, isn't quite well-rounded enough. Like a lot of times, what you'll hear about us, if we're not talking about rap music or we're not talking about sports, then we're not talking about much in terms of us culturally. And so it gave me an opportunity to give a shout out to those of us who grew up here, and our parents, for having the foresight, or even just stumbling into a good neighborhood for us as young people. And also, recognizing that, it's not nirvana. Obviously, some of the research that I did in writing the article, I realized that, right before we moved here in, I think like 80, 81, there were some significant racial things going on here, some tensions, et cetera. And some of the Black families here beforehand really had to go to bat to kind of to deal with those issues. But I felt that also is part and parcel of the culture of us here, which is that, our families have fought to make sure that we have a good place to grow up, and that, we have the equity that we deserve, and that, we just didn't come for play, like they say, families came to do things, to continue to have us be movers and shakers in the world, which is not to put anybody else's neighborhood or whatever down, but I just wanted to give a shout out to that. So it was fun to be able to do that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important because one of the motivations for me starting the channel was that there wasn't anyone out there in cyberspace that represented my point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I know of. I don't think there is anyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
At least out in the YouTube world as a Black person, right? There are people out there that are similar, but I started to realize my own uniqueness as I was getting older and much older, and it dawned on me. So David, wait a minute, you're doing something that's very different. But Karen, I believe even though it might be very, very different, I think that I hope that I still present very down to earth. Right. So in other words, I can reach for the stars, right? Anyone can reach for the stars, but I also think it's important to stay grounded.
Yeah.
And I think South Orange provided an excellent platform in that space.
Yeah.
Right.
Think about that, David. I mean, think about the things like, I mentioned about dance and about a lot of things. Like I worked backstage one semester, what have you, for the play. I think it was Oklahoma that year, whatever, doing makeup, all these type of things. And you remember I was the manager of this special dance troupe, for that 1 year. And so it's like all of these experiences and these types of exposure, a lot of times, a lot of schools, districts are really dealing with a lot of cutbacks in the arts and all kinds of things. I took my first communication class at Columbia High School, and
who taught that class? Who do you remember?
Wow, I don't remember what his name was.
I think Richter? I remember
Richter, maybe. I think Mr. Richter, something like that. And and wound up majoring in communication when I went to Rutgers. So but it gave me an exposure. I was like, oh, I didn't even know that was really like a field of study, and it has become something that really laid the groundwork for me. So I felt as though we are constantly, like I mentioned in the article, we are always having to do checks and balances and making sure, because situations continue to come up, racially motivated situations, inequities, all those things continue to happen. And we have to keep our eye on all that and make sure that, even for the families living here now, et cetera, that their kids are properly taken care of. And at the same time, I think it's important to recognize that when I think about all of our friends and peers or whatever, folks have gone on and done really interesting things, very dynamic things. And I feel very blessed to have been in people's company and to continue, use with social media and stuff to kind of re-engage with folks that we knew back then and go, oh, wow, you're working on this, you're doing this, your kids are doing this, your life has gone in this direction. So anyway, I hear what you're saying.
Let me ask you one direct question. Let's say you're speaking to one of these families that are living in Brooklyn or some other place in New Jersey. What's so special and unique about South Orange? I can put Maplewood in there, but what's the big deal about South Orange? I mean, you and I are talking, and it's sort of like inside baseball a bit.
Yes,
baseball for people who also grew up during that time. But what was such a big deal? I'll ask it twofold. What was such a big deal specifically, even more specifically, about what we went through when we were growing up, and what's happening now that you can, use an example to tell people what South Orange is about?
Got you. I would say back then, none of us in our friend group were shocked when The Cosby Show and A Different World came out.
No.
And this is not to be bourgeois at all, because I didn't grow up like that at all. The Chambers didn't play that.
It's not to be bougie. No.
No, the Chambers didn't play that. I grew up very down to earth. We were not those people.
No.
But seeing, families do what they do, learning back in the day about pen relays and HBCUs and all of that. When that all came on TV, and I think maybe that was our senior year or whatever that those shows came on, we weren't shocked. We were like, oh, look. They remind us of us. Cool. Oh, I like that sweatshirt, or I like that piece of black art on the wall, or, oh yeah, my parents are playing that jazz in the background, or what have you. I think for me, getting to see a situation where Black families were doing what they do in a way that was intact for the most part, and progressive, and not disconnected from Blackness, because sometimes people get this view that for Black folks to be reaching higher and that somehow we have to divorce ourselves from Blackness, which was totally the opposite. Like, I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but I can speak for us. I mean, we very much had our own little unit where, when I moved to Chicago, for example, they were like, well, what you know about house music? I'm like, please, I'm from Jersey. I'm from, we grew up,
right.
knowing
they had
about
no
house
idea.
Music.
They
were shocked.
They were shocked?
They were shocked. They were like, what you know about, Knuckles and all that? Like, what you know about all of that? So anyway.
Little did they know, right?
Little did they know that we were living for house music. And so that whole thing, David, everybody didn't grow up like that. You know, there was something
Right.
to that. And so it was very affirming, to have our sound, to have certain things that we did, to have, just to really feel affirmed that we didn't have to become somebody else to be important and to be successful. That's what I got out of my upbringing. I did not, and that's something I've taken with me through my life. Like, I have never had an aspiration to become someone else, to become somebody else's culture in order to feel successful. So that's what I got. And I think now it's a little different because I don't have kids, right? So in talking to people, because, one of our friends kind of, had a little critique for me after reading the article and said, look, well, our high school isn't what it used to be. And I feel like there's some, inequalities there that are existing for some of the, students of color, et cetera. So me not having kids in the school system, I don't know.
Right.
But I would say that my general feeling about the community, like they've rebranded a lot of South Orange. Like, for example, it's now become the Valley. So it's South Orange mixed a little with West Orange, and Orange has become like the Valley Arts District.
I see.
So when the South Orange Performing Arts Center went in place, and a lot of other, these artistic cultural things came into our area, they kind of rebranded our area as this arts district. So that would be cool. That has been really cool. So I have met more like working artists, Kevin, like fine artists, people who are professional musicians, who live here, and who do their shows here, do their performances here. And so that's been really cool to have that, without me having to get on the train and go to the city. Wow. I mean, of course, obviously that's a whole other universe, but to have a little microcosm culturally has been really cool. Like it's been very good. So I would say, for people who are looking for a suburb that doesn't feel cookie cutter, right, and where there is a deep respect for multiculturalism, because some people give it lip service, like yeah, we're multicultural, but you don't necessarily feel comfortable driving through town. We all know those neighborhoods. I don't know. You're in Switzerland now, so I don't know what it's like there, being an expat and everything. But here, there's certain neighborhoods that you can feel the ooh, I don't really want you to be here. You are not that welcome. But here does not feel like that. It still feels like you could be who you are and still be cool. So that's my spiel.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, look, I would have to agree with you. I mean, we did do a lot. We did. And in fact, I mean, as you know, I was a gymnast and then a dancer, and then it was like, but what I think existed, there were all of these different cliques of kids.
Right, I joked about that in the article.
There were a lot of cliques.
It was like stepping into a John Hughes movie.
Yes.
So regardless whether you were white, black, whatever,
exactly,
it was very much like your 16 Candles.
Yes, it was. People
won't even know who that is.
Lots of different cliques, and
the Breakfast Club.
Yeah. I think, I didn't really belong to a clique, I think, until our senior year, like the
we created one.
Junior, because we had all of that time to really go through, like, sophomore year, junior. Like when we became seniors, we knew that it was like, all right, this is the end, right? So there was nobody else to look up to, right, in terms of our peers. We were the ones there, so we had to kind of figure out a way to, to form a clique, which is what we did. But you're correct. There are all these different little cliques, and what I enjoyed about that, just as I was talking to you about business, I just was very curious about the different cliques, and I could
in business now. You mean as an adult?
Well, even back then, I could memorize the cliques, or it wasn't like, oh, this is so and so, or this is like that's why I looked. I think that's why I worked. Sorry, I worked on the yearbook. I think I worked on the Columbia High School yearbook.
Oh yeah,
and I worked on the junior high yearbook, because literally, I could recall people's information.
Wow.
And Karen, this has served me. And I apologize, because it's like almost like a wow moment or an aha moment. because I'm doing the same thing now in the current job. What I did 30 years ago, same thing I'm doing now, is memorizing people. The different departments are like the different cliques.
Well,
right?
you know what is, David, what I thought of when you said that was an early version of branding. That everyone uses the term branding. So it kind of is like an early version of branding, like to kind of say, okay, that kind of people group has these kind of things in common, and you can kind of itemize. It's the same way, you know, because I mean, working in marketing all these years, you know, you kind of had to unfortunately stereotype people a little and go, okay, what can I maybe expect out of this group of people, this group of people? What are their actions and motivations and interests going to be? And that's really branding. So maybe, you know, I get it, you know, the connection between then and now.
Loved it. Right. So let me just throw this out to you to make you laugh.
Sure.
Remember in the yearbook, you could purchase a page, right? Remember, and everybody, like, nobody really cared about the first, you know, what, 80% of the yearbook, right? That was just, it was all about purchasing a page with your click, right? So at the end, if you go to the end of the yearbook, you will see everybody's. So if I were to, in other words, if I were to do the research, I would start with the back. Right, because then you saw, like, you know, you saw, you know, I won't specifically name people, but I remember there was a group of girls that they were posing on a car, like they were all standing on the car, right, or sitting on the car. There was like 13 of them, and I remember saying, I didn't even know that one was a part of the clique. Like, that's when I started to learn more about, you know, my class or the people that we went, you know, because I knew them differently sometimes.
Right, sure.
I didn't know that person's in that clique. Didn't know, right? So I when the pages, when we started getting the pages for that, for the yearbook, and we started seeing, I was like, wait a minute, this is getting good, right? And then one group once one group said, hey, we're going to put money down for one. Then I don't know if you remember, we were scrambling around to get our little coins together because our little clique was going to be represented.
Oh my God, you are really taking me back. I do remember that.
We would try to get our, you know, you know, we trying to get our clique money. We're like, oh no, we gotta represent. We gotta represent everything, right? So I mean, I get, as you know, I get very excited about this because maybe, as you're correct in saying, I was in this process of branding or understanding how branding works, right?
Right.
Didn't know it. Didn't know. But
well, look, even in terms of the logo, I mean, the things that we did, that was all branding.
It was all
branding. You know, that was all early versions of branding. So yeah.
Well, anyway, let's jump to the topic of you know, hair and skincare and all of this beauty.
Sure.
What motivated me to reach out to you again was that we had a guest on, Cara Young, supermodel, and the way that I found her was because I had spoken to another guest I'd interviewed another person, and they were talking about hair, and it just somehow came up, and I'm like, this hair thing is huge. And so as I was doing research, that's how I found Cara, because she was the co-founder of Hair Rules.
Oh yeah.
And her partner Dickie, or her business partner Dickie, I also found him. So that's how I pulled them on. But of course, as I was doing the research, I was thinking about you the whole time. You know, like, oh, okay, well, what would Karen say about this? Or, you know, explain to folks out there, why is it so important for, I mean, it sounds as it may be a stupid question. Why is it so important for Black women or women of color to have a space in the beauty business? What is so unique about having a space there that, because and truth be told, I thought that the Black women and people of color have had a space for years now, but it seems as if people are still sort of harping or, you know, saying, hey, we need this or we need this. And when I go into any beauty store, I see tons of product. I see tons of product, right? Can you elaborate on what that means to you and what that means in the marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, it's been quite an evolution. I mean, one of the things I'm excited about now, I was a one of the co-writers for a book that's coming out now by the Makeup Museum called Beauty Stories from Around the World. And so my particular piece that I wrote was particularly on African-American women and our historical beauty journey. And it was important for me to write that because, somebody from the outside might look at it and say, yeah, well, there's plenty of products in the store. What is the big deal? But what I chronicled was this whole arc of how at certain time periods, the products that were developed for us and marketed to us were more so about changing who we are. Skin lighteners and hair relaxers, which no shade to anybody who relaxes their hair, nothing wrong with that. But the messaging at a certain time period was, to try to help Black women get more proximity to whiteness. So that was like the beauty messaging really throughout the 50s into the 60s. And it wasn't until the 70s and the whole idea of Black is beautiful and brands like Afro Sheen, et cetera, became important to us, not just in terms of product and what it did for our hair, but culturally, and the messages that was sending. And so what's wild is that even like, we were harkening back to the 80s when we were growing up, there were not a lot of brands back then that made shades for us. You'd see like a lot of beige shades, and then you'd see a couple of like a tawny, like a cocoa, and maybe like, an ebony or whatever. Like there might be like 10 beige shades and like a couple stuck on the end for Black women to choose from, with the exception of brands that only exclusively marketed to Black women. And I think what has evolved is this idea of, that there's such a diversity with us that it's not about just, making us an afterthought. And that's for hair and, cosmetics and skincare. And so I think, now what's been wonderful is that social media and this rise in social media has created like far more of a democracy where consumers are like, no, we're going to take the lead in letting you know what we want and do not want. So a lot of the hair care industry, we talk about brands like Hair Rules and a lot of other brands for textured hair. A lot of those came out of Black women beginning to go on social media and have their own communities to talk about dealing with textured hair. Mm-hmm. And, they were experimenting and sharing information with one another once social media really took off. So brands had to then catch up and go, oh, wait, we can't dictate to women of color anymore what we think is in vogue and in style or what have you, because they're making their own communities and deciding for themselves what they want. And the industries had to catch up. And so what the evolutionary turn has been now in a lot of, where you have brands that were marketing to us, but weren't necessarily owned by us. And so now we've had an interesting boom, particularly just in the past few years, of Black brands that have merged with Black founders, and where they really were taking ownership. And again, I never try to shade brands that are targeting us but not owned by us, because sometimes those brands honestly wind up with the capital to be able to do more. And so I know a lot of, particularly now being in CEW, a lot of Black women who are heading up those brands that, we don't necessarily own them. But, oh, sorry, David, whoops, this was supposed to be on vibrate. But they are utilizing those dollars to push forward initiatives like the Crown Act, that ends discrimination for people who wear their hair natural. Like there are lots of general market brands who have Black leadership there who have really had their organizations get behind those initiatives. And particularly with COVID and what has happened with Black Lives Matter, there are some general market brands, again, who have Black leadership that are like, look, we need to now be supporting Black founded brands with our dollars. So there's a lot happening. And so for me, it's a very exciting time to be in the industry because there is so much diversity happening. There's definitely room for much more and many new initiatives, but I'm excited to see what's happening. Let's put it that way.
And so as I think back, that kind of creativity, thinking, innovation, that wasn't happening when we were coming up in the 80s, or maybe that was only in our own minds as we were having discussions about what we thought, the marketplace would be.
Well, it's funny, I would say we just come from creative people. So that's going to be a natural. You know what I'm saying? So what people were doing, like I remember even as a teenager mixing my own shades in my bathroom. And I remember taking a liquid foundation. I accidentally dried it out. I left it on the counter overnight. It dried it out. It got dense. And I realized the next day, oh, wow, this is great. Because the fact that it's more dense, it had more opaque coverage. So I wound up creating my own concealer by accident. So I think, and I remember, like you talk about when I was cutting people's hair in high school and college and stuff. Pretty much it was like, I remember when Salt and Pepper came out and they had those asymmetrical bobs. Right. I was figuring out, just trying to use my little bit of, math was not my strong suit in high school, but I didn't do so bad in geometry. So I kind of remember, I was like, okay, I got to cut this at a 45-degree angle on this side, and a 90-degree angle on that side, and figuring it out. So I think, we've always been super creative, and I think a lot of times it amounts to the dollars and cents, because a lot of times I'll mentor certain people who, let's say, they want to start their own brand or whatever, and the difficulty sometimes really is the financial part. How do I get there? How do I materialize those dreams? Because it takes a lot, to put all those pieces together. But yeah, we've always been creative. I mean, you think about right down to David. I mean, even down to fashion. I remember cutting up sweatshirts in high school and doing stuff. I think that what I love really most about my own Blackness and us as a people is the creativity, is the ability to remix something. Even you go back to when we talked about the music we grew up on. You think about, we were listening to records that came out of the UK and this, that, and the other, and mixing that in with so this idea of cultural admixture and creativity, I think, that's like Wakanda had nothing on us in terms of that. I think, we've always been a creative people and continue to be. So I think what we're seeing now is people who are pushing the envelope on trying to get that to a more equitable place business wise, so that they can, maintain those businesses and not just have them be ideas that die on the vine.
You said so much. I mean, of course, I'm like, my brain is going bling, 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 because the ideas are kind of, starting to turn. Because one of the things that I just happen to pop up with is, okay, there should be a VC, a venture capital firm or group that understands exactly what you just described. The process.
I think there are some, David.
There has to be, right? There has to be.
Yeah. And especially now. And look, there are some brothers and sisters out here with some dollars and who have made very strategic moves in order to have those dollars, in order to help them recirculate. So we're seeing that, especially like just this past 12 months. It's remarkable. Like, that piece is really, really exciting to me, that are like, oh, wait a minute, we're making this money to be able to reinvest this money, and also to assist those businesses in knowing how to move and groove in that space, because you also just don't want to hand over a chunk of money and go, okay, figure it out. So I think what I'm starting to see is more sharing of education, and like, how do you do that? Like, how do you really build a business so it's not just conceptual? So yeah, some of that is starting to happen. Of course, we could certainly use more of that.
Right. It's interesting. I also believe, and we're going to start talking about this other area that you and I have an affinity for, which is, to put it bluntly, spirituality, or is there another word or another way that we can describe it? Just being, as you said, or you described, being woke. Now, I do believe that there's a big difference between being woke, right? As we have it in quotes, and being spiritual, right? Because I think,
definitely,
right, like being.
So what if we talked about consciousness?
Consciousness is also
higher consciousness.
the funny thing is, you talk about how we grew up in South Orange, and then when I went to the University of Pennsylvania, I came into, or found more people that were like the folks that I knew from South Orange, Maplewood. So that's why I was so excited to go to that school, because as you were saying, we were more conscious. And as you definitely described, maybe it was that the people that were growing up as conscious, that was a small group of people. That wasn't everybody's experience.
Sure.
Right? It was a specific group of people that we knew or kind of grew up with, and we were able to have these conversations, but that was not necessarily
the masses. No, definitely. I mean, I think we can look at society, just look around, globally, and see that, consciousness. I mean, you remember when even Oprah changed the formatting of her show, where she started off just a traditional talk show and then went to this thing, Find Your Spirit, or in whatever your spirit. And people were like, what are you talking about? What is that? You talking about religion? You talking about whatever? This idea of incorporating a kind of conscious, awakened sense of, whatever. People weren't talking about that yet. I think it was early on. I think ideas are kind of have a ripple effect.
Right.
So
that's when she was singing in the beginning, like when she used to have the do 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 do, and then she all of a sudden she wanted to sing, and she sang the beginning, and then I think that lasted for a year, and then they said, no, go back to the
other thing. Right, but she started talking about these concepts and having, people like Eckhart Tolle and Marianne Williamson were coming on the show.
That's right.
And people were like, what is going on here? How'd that all change? Because I think that, we each have our own path. Oh, and I'm jumping ahead. Sorry. Did you want to talk about something else before we got to that?
No. I'm following you.
All right. So, everybody has their path of enlightenment, and some people never get on a path of enlightenment. They just stay right where they are, and everything's good, and it's business as usual. But I'll tell you, for me, I went back and forth with some spiritual pursuits and business pursuits. And so, I think about I became an interfaith minister, which is something, I don't really have that on my LinkedIn and my resume and all that, because it was really more so a personal pursuit for myself. It wasn't something that became like a vocational type of thing that I wanted to do. I just wanted to know about different forms of spirituality, and then, start to study different kinds of energy work, Reiki and stuff like that. And then, we talked about, Landmark and doing the forum. I think I was 28 when I did Landmark Forum, and then doing that whole curriculum for living. I don't know if they call it that anymore, but that's what they called it at the time.
What would you call Landmark, just for people that don't understand what that is?
Oh, sure. Sorry about that. I forget. We're not just on the phone.
No. This is going out.
This is going out. Okay. So for me, I would describe it as it was a program for me that was personal development work that allowed me to shift my paradigm. And what brought me into it, a friend of mine introduced me to it, and it was, this 3-day weekend. And she said, okay, Karen, come up with some things that you really want to shift in your life, if you could. And, I don't remember exactly what they all were. It was about relationships and job and something else. And I was like, okay, that's my goal. I trusted the people who introduced me to it. So I was like, okay, I don't even know what this is, but all right, cool. But over those 3 days, what I discovered is I had all these really set stories and narratives in my life about who I was, and they were very limited. And they existed for me like they were factual, like different things about my appearance or, other things like that. And so I had a real narrow view of myself at that time. Even with, being intuitive and creative and all those things, I still had a really narrow view of myself. And this thing just blew that wide open. And all of a sudden I was able to perceive my life as being far more of an open book that didn't have these absolute parameters around it, like being conscious of my race, but not feeling limited by it, being conscious that, as a bigger girl, everybody's not going to love that, but that, hey, I don't need that to define me. Like I can really define my own sense of self-esteem for myself. And, a couple of other, like you mentioned, having an aha moment. I had a bunch of aha moments. So it really was an opportunity to break down a lot of my own limitations and as far as what I thought about life, and go, oh, wait a minute, I can really, like you talked about creativity, I can create things that don't exist already. Even if it's just like you said, within an existing company or what have you, like, wait a minute, I can bring this to the table. It may not exist already, but I don't need to act like it's never going to exist. You know, I have more of an ability to have an input into the direction and flow of my life than I thought I did. So that's what I got out of that work. And it really shifted everything for me. You know, it really changed a lot for me. And then, you know, years later, like I said, this interfaith ministry training essentially was just allowing me to see different people's viewpoints. Like, you know, the whole multiculturalism was always interesting to me. So now I got to see, hey, how do the Taoists look at certain ideas? How do Buddhists look at certain ideas? How do, you know, even, you know, people who just really believe in nature, you know, and follow nature. Like, so all these things were like, wow, they were very eye-opening for me. So, so all that has really, I've been able to integrate that into, you know, what I do in my day job. So that thing, you know, I'm grateful for that.
So how would you give us an example of how you integrate this aspect into your job, just for people who are not necessarily clear on how that works? Because you and I know that you and I both do that, right? And we were doing this integration work probably from very early on, but we just didn't know it was called integration work. So when you went to Landmark, that was just another paintbrush in my eyes.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Another way to use a knife and fork, right?
Right. Well said.
Right. And but a lot of people don't necessarily know or even can comprehend what you mean, even by you saying, oh, I was allowed to bring up more of who I am, or I discovered that I was not limited. Like that still doesn't resonate to a broad.
Yeah, no, I get it. You know, well, one of the first things on a very practical level is that a lot of people in the beauty industry don't look like me. I mean, not just from a racial standpoint, but, you know, I work with a lot of, you know, petite little women who wear Christian Louboutins, and a lot of, you know, are a certain way. We'll put it that way. I had no interest in that. I am loving this working from home in this pandemic, because I could be in my yoga clothes and my Uggs and just really being me. This is really who I am. I've never been that girl, but I love the idea of how to craft and design and create and assist women in feeling good about themselves. But I just didn't fit in. So one of the things that gave me was the confidence to be like, I don't have to fit in. Like, stop trying to fit in. And then as my role in leadership positions began to grow, also realizing that nobody else exactly has to fit in either. Like, it is okay for us to really all be unique and different. And I can look for people's strengths and see how to collaborate without letting my own stories about that get in the way. So another thing, you know, the beauty and fashion industry can be really shallow. So you have a lot of people in there who, you know, that whole devil wears Prada concept is very real in the beauty industry. And for me, I find that, you know, repulsive. I find, you know, people who are bullies, people who put other people down, people who make themselves feel better by me, you know, that is the absolute opposite of how I was raised and what my personal business ethics were. So it was really important for me to think about, how do we really, you know, people talk about teams, everybody uses the word teams at work, but do they really care about teams, or is that whole hierarchical thing really at work? So I hate the word boss. The people, oh, boss babe, boss this, I do not like it. To me, people lead, people work together, you know, people mentor, people whatever. But this idea of boss or bossiness, I think is a lack of skill in my view. It's just a matter of, you know, I need to make you feel bad to make myself feel better. So one of the spiritual concepts or personal concepts that I feel I've brought to the table is how do we have a more equitable situation, so that, you know, if whether you are like the junior manager or you are the administrative assistant, or whether you are the VP or the director, whatever, come to the table with your ideas, like come prepared, like let's do this, you know, kind of, you know, for lack of a better word, family style. How do we consider ourselves more of a family than a hierarchical situation where people are coming to work feeling afraid to be there, or they're not being honest about ideas because they don't want to feel stupid or what. You have so many work environments where people do not bring their best because they're afraid. And so for me, that's always been one of the areas that has been important to me. And I try to bring that to everything. That's an example.
Very, very interesting. I mean, you brought up a whole bunch of things. I'll tell you how it is, how this concept of being woke or being conscious has shifted me. When I was younger, even though I had all of these aspirations to do all of these big things, I think I was raised in an environment feeling a lack of. Okay. So I did not understand why certain people got certain things and other people did not. Yeah. And I also saw a lot of the struggle that was going on in the Black community, and I took that on. I took that on in a huge way, right? To the point where it definitely gave me opportunities, but it was also limiting, because in order to do all of these big things that I aspired to do, I had to learn that people that were not Black, I could have the same kind of passion for them as I did for Black people. Does that make sense?
Sure. Absolutely.
And that was a huge, huge shift. Had I not had that shift, I wouldn't be here in Switzerland.
Right.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
I had to literally strip away the story,
boom,
right, that we came up with. That doesn't mean that I don't understand our history and how we came up, but I realized that I had to make a shift, right? And part of the other thing, I guess, to focus on, or to say, this whole idea of lack, that comes in all shades. That comes in all shades. So what I had to begin to see was like, okay, Dave, you have to start to work. Whatever you're feeling in terms of lack, you have to be the person that other people who lack or feel lack would want to have an exchange or communication with.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So this goes on. It doesn't have to go on like 24/7. Like there could be a person who's fairly, abundant in terms of everything that they get, but that one moment that you catch them where there's the opposite or there's the lack, you can see it. And and this has actually helped me create the channel. I had to be the person that could provide the solution to anybody, regardless of who they were. And that is, I think, the way I started to integrate this consciousness into business.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So let's say something as simple as returning an email. Okay. So one of the bosses that I had, I think she was really, really brilliant, to the point where she was so brilliant that she also she had a bit of, how do you call it? She had a tremendous weakness as well. Right.
Gotcha.
But I would watch the way she would, like, she'd say, okay, I want to be the first person to accept the invite. So if an invite comes to me, you accept it. Right. Like you accept it right when you get it. Right.
Because that meant something to her.
It meant something to her. Right. So then, okay. It's the same way that I would look at the end of the yearbook, right, and see, all right, like that person is this and that. As soon as she said that, I'm like, all right, let me check this out. Let me see how this works for her.
Yeah.
And let me see if it will work for me.
Right.
And let me see if it can actually, by me sort of understanding the way it works for her and how it can work for me, let me see by doing it whether it will actually increase and work for not only her, not only for me, but also everybody on the team.
Got it.
Right. So this is not something that is normally, this is not happening in corporation. I know this is not happening on a regular basis. So I get to practice this sort of conscious team building, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Say, okay, why is it important for her to accept the invite first? Why does there were certain like little things that she would do. I'm like, but then as a result of that, Karen, I started to bring that into the next job, right? Because they didn't have any idea what this person was about. Say, well, let's see so-and-so about emailing back as soon as the person emails.
Okay.
Right? They email you and I assist people, I assist the team. So I'm like, I have to start to get them to see that I'm trustworthy, or I'm thinking about them, right? Or I want to clear up any issue, anything that is not, that's not feeling. I need to, all right, let's get this done, right? So that's the way I integrate. I try to empathize. I try to, combination. It's not just one thing. It really is. And then it becomes an art form, almost like Kung Fu in the office, right? Like for me, when I come to work, I have did you get what I'm saying? My method.
Right. Your method. Well, I think, you bring a couple good points, David, that to me, a good leader has, regardless of their role in an organization. And number, you mentioned empathy. My favorite word, authenticity. And the reality is, and I think if nothing else, this time period with COVID and everything should teach people that we come to the workplace as the people that we are. We're people before we are whatever our title is. So if people fail to recognize that, the person on the other end of the email, the person on the other end of the phone call, the person on the other end of the deal or whatever is another human being dealing with the whole range of their lives before they even show up to you. Like if you miss that, then you miss an ability to have effective communication and effective interaction. Because we're not just processes, we're not machines, we're not AI. This is what separates us from AI, is that we've got a whole other set of stuff happening before we show up. So if you're clueless about that, chances are you're not going to be particularly effective in how you interact with people or how you move the needle on any situation, whether you're trying to launch a brand or send out an email or do an event or whatever. It's all the same process, really. And you cannot move people forward if you don't have a sense of who is that person on the other end of this exchange, of this transaction. So similarly, with each new product, if I was launching a product, number one, I'd be obviously thinking about Iman. And, is she going to like this? Is she going to be down with this? Is this going to be something that goes with her brand or her ideology or thoughts about beauty? And then on the other hand, is it going to work for the consumer? Because if I do something totally esoteric and consumers like, oh, they're out of touch, then that's a fail. And I think that there's just wisdom in thinking intuitively about human beings as human beings first before you just think about whatever process you're trying to barrel your way through. So that's how I take that.
Well, Karen, I mean, as we were growing up, and I'm going to bring politics into this briefly.
Sure.
As we were growing up, we would see on television the people that we still see on television during this situation. So Cuomo was around when we were coming up. Even the junior, not Mario Cuomo, but like the mayor, not the mayor, the governor, Andrew. Yeah, we saw him. We saw, like, I try to tell people, we see all the people that are out there now. We grew up with them.
Sure.
Trump, Clinton, both Clintons, right? So obviously there was something that they were not. I mean, we didn't see empathy coming from this group of people. Like were like, you see what I'm saying? Like these were not. This was not the Eckhart Tolle. This was not the Oprah. Oprah slid in through the cracks. Like she was very close to kind of falling off the cliff in terms of being with that group. And some people would even say that she is with that group. But I mean, she in other words, we didn't see a lot of this. Like, we may have been talking about it when we were younger,
right?
Clearly, the people running business were not interested in what consumers really were interested.
Oh, I agree with you. And I think that, you know, I look at life as like the eras of life evolve in the same way that individuals evolve. So you're absolutely right. In the same way that there was a certain mindset around the 50s and a certain mindset around the 60s. And so, you know, for the most part, we knew that there were certain monetary goals that we were trying to get to, you know, certain academic goals that would lead to certain monetary goals. But you're right, this conversation and even the idea of bringing in, you know, empathy and inclusion and belonging and those conversations in business, nobody was having those conversations. You know, my guy would probably disagree with me because he was working diversity and inclusion 40 years ago, but people weren't talking about things like they're talking about them now. Inclusion, what? Yeah, it'd be like, oh well, like get over it. Like you either fit, you don't fit, whatever, you know. So I agree, David. You know, but I think that the human race has an opportunity to constantly evolve. Like, you know, we going from a Neanderthal kind of mindset, you know, to hopefully people getting a little bit more conscious. And like even today, like it was hard even today getting ready for this call. You know, we just had, you know, horrible shootings in Atlanta that has impacted the Asian American community. And it's just sad. It's like horrible. But, you know, I think the thought process has to be now that maybe we can go from just siloed conversations about this race, this race, this race, this group, and being like, okay, as a human family, how do we ensure that these ideas around supremacy and violence and all those things, like how do we eradicate that from the human consciousness? And so that's how I've been kind of looking at it lately. You know, each person and each group's individual struggle is important. And I think that you know, there has to, hopefully, this is a cracking open of some kind of evolution that's going to allow people to have an awareness that we just need to treat each other better. You know, that's my prayer and goal anyway.
Very well, look, so much, you know, I could go on and talk to you even longer. I'm going to wind it down, but I do want to ask you about the younger generation, what your impression is of this younger generation. And this is on the heels of the Meghan Markle, Prince Harry interview, and sort of how this person who is a mixed race descent, who has literally married a prince, who, do you understand? Meaning, like, she's coming from an environment, and it's almost like it's I don't know if people see this. It's like one of the longest passes in life. I mean, you come from Los Angeles, from how you grew up, and all of a sudden you're in the palace, and yet there's still this conversation about diversity and inclusion, even in this realm. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's almost like, it's very weird to me, because I cannot, like, for me, I'd be like, but you made it into the palace, right? Like my focus, like, you got in.
Got you.
He's like, I got in and I still didn't like it, or they still were not this and they still were not that, you know? So it's made me think, because she's not the only younger person who is thinking this way. Do you understand what I'm saying? There are a lot of people out there who think.
I think there's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack there. For me, I look at it a little bit differently in that I'm just ready to see kind of all these hierarchical, social Darwinistic systems fall down. So I have no love for the monarchy. I think that, you know, it's ridiculous. It's like, you know, how many forms of institutionalized hierarchy do we really need? So I think, you know, I look at it as this, like, to me, that wasn't necessarily her end game goal to be in the palace, because at the end of the day, I don't even think Harry didn't even want to be in the palace.
No,
You
no,
know,
no.
I think he enjoys what he gets from being in the
Let
palace,
loose. He just wanted to let
but
loose.
clearly, yeah, he will
He
live his
wanted to let
life.
loose.
So
Yeah, yeah.
so I think that, and there's so much going on. And somebody really called me on the carpet recently when I talked about, you know, I don't know if it's, you know, Gen Z or millennials, whatever. I had
Sure.
said something that was kind of overgeneralizing, and she called me on the carpet about it, and I was glad, because I needed to check myself on that, because we're seeing a lot of different things. You know, we're seeing, you know, young people who are very politically active, young people who are pushing the envelope. I think about those kids who were involved in the shooting in Lakeland, and had those kids, you know, had the bravery to come out and say, wait a minute, you know, we do not want to get shot up in school. Like, you all need to do something about these gun laws and stuff. So we have those kids with a tremendous amount of passion. I think that some of us as adults have failed some of them.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I think about there was a debate that I was engaged in a little bit about somebody who was having a whole bunch of thoughts about the Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion Grammy performance.
Yes.
And that song. So it was an interesting conversation.
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna leave it at that. But I think that that in certain ways, what we're talking about now, David, is that I don't know that we've intentionally failed them, but I think that some of the young people don't really have the kind of role models, and maybe they don't want us as role models, honestly, because, you know, take those people who don't have a high sense of consciousness. They might be like, look, I'm not trying to have you all as a role model, but I think that we have to provide for them at least a vision of a stable path forward, you know, from a mentoring standpoint, and to take that seriously, because they're dealing with a lot. I can't even imagine. I mean, you and I went down memory lane about high school. These kids, you know, been sitting at home with their parents on computers, or trying to figure out, they miss their proms, and they're not getting a march, and so my heart goes out to them. So I think there's a lot there. So I'm learning not to make those generalizations about young people, because I'm seeing some that are like, wow, I wish I had been that age. And then I'm seeing others that are, you know, floundering and like, look, nothing makes sense anymore. I don't get any of it. And I'm going to be a little checked out. So, and you know what? And during look, if we were to break it down, we had all kinds of people that we knew growing up too, with different ways of handling life. So, but I do think we owe it to them to be our best and to model our best, so at least they get to have some kind of anchoring in a world that is all over the place.
No, I did not see the Cardi B Megan Thee Stallion performance, but I had heard about it, and it is trending on social media.
Yes,
so I will have to check it out.
Yes, as an aficionado of pop culture, you will have to check that out.
As the interest that I have, I will tell you this though. I will, and maybe this comes back to this whole thing about really branding people in business, and business being another form of communication. So I didn't know who Cardi B was, or no, I first saw Cardi B on this show, this radio show of a reverend, this really controversial reverend in Harlem, who has a church, and he people try to take the church away from him. He's very outspoken, very outlandish. He was one of these ministers that was pushing buying $1 brownstone back when we were coming up. I didn't know that they were selling brownstones for $1 when we were coming up in high school, right? This was his push. Well, I guess he was talking to Cardi B and trying to save her, right? Or trying to tell her that she was not,
living the righteous life,
on the right path, right? And I just remember, like, who is this? And then as I started to see her come into the public domain, or sort of emerge into the public domain, I started to say, I get it. Like, there was a moment where I understood. Yeah, she's ratchet. Yeah, but I understand why. I understand her decision making. I understand why she, decided to become a
It's a
stripper.
brand.
But
It's a
I
brand.
don't know if she said, I'm going to brand myself. I think she just did another version, and just hear me out on this. She just did another version of integrating, probably on a level that most rappers in that sphere had not done. And that's why she started to emerge even over some of the other rap stars that had a foothold on the culture. Like at the time it was what's her name? The one who's
Nicki
from,
Minaj.
it was all about Nicki Minaj, but she, for some reason, there was a way that Cardi B was integrating her life, her philosophy, how she sees the world, her affection for money, right? But that didn't take away from the fact that she could be funny, and at the same time be, ratchet and almost like a little gangster.
Yeah.
He was authentic, but that I think you may not see it as being authentic, but I saw more and more of that as her authenticity. And then it became a character, once people, jumped on board, right? Then it became, where she was a character. But initially, Karen, I think some of the things that we're talking about, she had it down. Like she was going with her gut. She knew what her limitations were. She knew what she could do. Even now, the performance, I don't know. I mean, I heard about it, but how long will her career be? I don't know.
Right.
But in terms of,
I think that to your point, I think she was very intentional. Like I almost think of like a Charo. Remember Charo back in the day? I think of Marilyn Monroe. I think that people who know the entertainment industry know that you have to create a brand, no matter what that brand is. So whether people like her good, bad, or indifferent, she has created a persona. Now, we don't know what she's like when she's home and those wigs and the costumes and everything are off. We don't know her like that, right? So we can't really say, but she's created a persona that sells. So regardless of if people do not like it, they are talking about it, and we knew from back in the day, back when Brooke Shields said that nothing is between her and her Calvins, like we knew that provocative statement, as much as it's nothing now. Back in the day, I was like, oh my goodness. But provocative is what drives entertainment.
Yeah, that's
so,
right.
So I think that she is very intentional. She's aware of what she's doing. She doesn't care if people like it or not, because she knows that somebody is enjoying this. And there is a lane for that style of entertainment. And what I find problematic, I don't particularly like it, but what I find problematic is when people critique her in this way of, oh my God, clutch my pearls, but yet there are other things that are the equivalent of that in other cultures that don't get that same critique. Let's face it, the former first lady, she did porn. We saw pictures of her, on the internet, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like, okay, if we're going to talk about, oh my goodness, clutch my pearls, this is so shocking, then let's talk about a lot of other things that are shocking, and shocking are a part of entertainment.
Right, that's true, right? Of course.
Right. So whatever. But I think that that for us, in terms of our culture, I think what is valuable to me is to make sure we have a balance, like that can exist. And at the same time, let's make sure we talk about Ta-Nehisi Coates. Let's make sure we're talking about people who are doing things that have nothing to do with WAP. That are doing things that have to do with what's between here. That needs to be that is our culture. Our culture exists between here.
I agree with you, but part of what, and this is why I'm so excited about the platform and kind of our dialogue, is that there was not. I saw this push into technology, into cyberspace, seeing all these new people coming up, having talk shows, and I'd be watching all of them, Karen. I would be I would
Yeah.
be on YouTube watching them for the past 4 years, all of them. I
Yeah.
didn't care what ideology, I just wanted to hear what someone new had to say. The same way with the yearbook. I'm like, all right, who's in the back? You know, who bought a page? I mean, what does that person have to say, right? And
Right.
then I
Right.
realized that, wait a minute, David, you could actually be one of those people. You know,
Oh,
that the thing
excellent.
that you and I are talking about, well, where's our space? Or where are people that have
Yeah.
similar ideas, right?
Right.
And I realized the people that we know, or that we know, they weren't being asked to be on TV.
Yeah.
They
That's
weren't
true,
being
David.
asked what they thought.
Right.
And this is
Right.
not just specific to, you know, the Black folks. I'm saying
Right. Right. Sure.
across the board.
Right.
I didn't
Right.
see people that I went to school with on TV.
Right. Right. Right.
I didn't. And I'm like, wait a minute, they need to be on TV. And when I worked in TV, I was the booker. So I was like, any opportunity that I could to bring somebody that I knew who had the qualifications on that I actually could pick up the phone and get on, I would do.
Sure.
Right. So
Yeah.
this is a very similar thing, you know, if not the same thing, even better, because
Cool.
I can be in Switzerland and you can be in the United States and we can have this.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Excellent.
Is there anything
Glad to
else
be
that you
here.
want to say before? I mean, I'll let you go. I've been on the phone with you. We're supposed to do 30 minutes, but I know it's going to be longer. But
Of
you
course.
and I,
Of course. You know, time
we can
flew.
talk like this all the time, like
That
all
is
the
true.
time.
That is true. That is true. Um,
Yeah.
No, I think you know we covered so much. I you know I do appreciate this idea of having smart and insightful dialogue, also that is not just about combat, which is great because a lot of what's on social media now is like that low hanging fruit of how do we just get people to fight and come at each other. You know, I think that we can have diverse opinions and be able to have like good dialogue about it. So you know, and there are not many spaces that are doing that. So you know, yeah, keep making that happen.
Good. Well, you know, I have no choice now. Somebody said, David, you might be doing this for the rest of your life, you know, in terms of like, well, yeah, maybe, you know, because
Yeah.
it's been almost a year. Somebody said it's been a year that I've been doing this. It's only been 11 months because I started it at the end of April.
Okay.
You know, so once we started getting into COVID, I knew this thing was going to go all the way. It's going to go for another 2 years, at least.
Yeah. We're going to be, you know, this has changed everything, David. Let's face it. You know, the way network TV and streaming and this and that, the way we consume communication, I think has been changed indefinitely. So, so yeah.
Well, anyway, well, look, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's been great, and you know, it's been a long time. We haven't seen you face to face.
I know.
For years, right? And this is the first time I haven't seen, maybe about 20 years plus.
Yeah, it's definitely been decades. It's been decades.
Look,
But good catching up with you, though.
Yeah. Look, let your family know that I'm thinking about them. Shout out to your boss, Iman. Like for she, I don't know if she knows, Iman. You got somebody. This person, you got to keep her close by. She's got a lot of, you know, just she knows, like, you know, a lot, and you have a very creative mind, and in terms of how you see the world, and you know, I think it's I hope when people see the interview that they see what I have seen for many years. So that
Thank you, David. Appreciate
right.
Appreciate it.
Tell
her
her I said what's up, and brother. I will talk to you soon.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, take care.
All right, take care.